This week I'm doing a character analysis on the highly requested Shinji Hirako. He had been the captain of the 5th Division for over 100 years, that is, until he was made to undergo holification thanks to Aizen's experiments. And it is because of this that Shinji was exiled from the Soul Society. Along with several other Shinigami who had also been holified, Shinji had banded them together and thus had become the leader of this group called the Vizards. It is no secret that Shinji is a beloved character. Not only does he have an incredible introduction, he also solidifies himself as one of the strongest Shinigami that we see, especially after knowing that he was one of the few Shinigami who were able to successfully land an attack on Aizen during the fake Karakura town arc. And in addition to this, he also has one of my favorite lines uttered within the entirety of this story. During the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, when Aizen has concealed himself and he is watching Urahara and Shinji speak, Shinji ends up revealing Aizen, who has been concealed under some camouflage. Aizen compliments his captain and asks when was it that he realized that he was there. Shinji hilariously responds that he has known about Aizen since he was in his mother's womb. So let's break down this character whose glorious white teeth could be on the cover of a Colgate advertisement. This is my breakdown and analysis of Shinji Hirako, the captain of the 5th Division and the leader of the Vizards. Shinji makes his debut appearance within the story in chapter 183 of the manga and in episode 109 of the anime. What you may not know about Shinji's character is that he was one of the first characters that we see at the start of the first chapter of Bleach. Kubo had originally intended to introduce Shinji's character much earlier within the story, but with the way that the story panned out, he was introduced later on. Going back to the first chapter of Bleach and seeing Shinji drawn in Kubo's very early art style is fascinating to me, and I wonder what other plans Kubo had initially with his character. When it comes to the appearance of Shinji, the first thing that you'll notice is his strikingly straight hair. They are like blonde strands of spaghetti. In addition to this, he always has a very disinterested expression through his eyes, and through his facial expressions, you'll always be able to see the top portion of his teeth, hence my reference to Colgate toothpaste earlier on. As the story progresses, Shinji's character has several changes of appearance, including his long-haired look as a captain from the Turn Back the Pendulum arc. Then we see his more casually dressed appearance that we are introduced to as the leader of the Vizards. And in the current timeline of Bleach, Shinji of course has returned to being a captain of the 5th Division, with a slight change in his hairstyle, with his fringe being cut towards the left hand side of his face. Shinji's personality is hilariously contrasted with his expressionless face. Despite his blank, disinterested face, Shinji definitely has a sense of humor, and through this he breathes comedic relief into serious moments of the story. And in addition to this, he loves annoying his underlings, in particular Hiyori. Despite this goofy attitude, Shinji is very perceptive, and this is demonstrated through how he keeps a close eye on Aizen during the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, even choosing to have Aizen as his lieutenant because he was able to perceive that he was up to no good. The suspicions of Aizen had indeed proven to be true, and we learned about the consequences of Shinji not taking action sooner and doing more to stop Aizen during the Turn Back the Pendulum arc. And it is during this very short flashback arc that we learn the most about Shinji's past. Up until this point within the story, we had known him only as a Vizard, but during this arc we are introduced to a completely different Gotei 13, as we are told of events that occurred 110 years ago, where Shinji and the other Vizards were forcibly made to undergo holification. So after having introduced Shinji's character, I'm now going to be going over his past. This will hopefully allow us to understand his appearances throughout the rest of the story, as we are able to appreciate where Shinji's character had come from, and what his mindset must have been when he had first met Ichigo, and what he had been feeling when he had seen Aizen again during the fake Karakura town arc. Shinji's chronological first appearance within the story occurs when he is making preparations to attend Urahara's captain ceremony. We also learned that the other members of the Vizards had positions within the Gotei 13 also. I loved seeing all of these characters interacting with captains who are currently holding their positions in the present. For example, characters like Shunsui and Ukitake. If you've seen the other videos on my channel, then you'll know that the Turn Back the Pendulum arc was about telling the backstory of Urahara. We get to also learn how Urahara's character is closely linked to the Vizards. After Urahara had first become a captain, he was struggling to deal with his lieutenant Hiyori, Hiyori, who had been refusing to accept him as a new captain. Shinji notices that Urahara is struggling and even offers him advice. He even goes as far as to say that Urahara reminds him of himself, and you can see that there are certainly some similarities between both Urahara and Shinji's character, especially in how their comedic nature contrasts with their seriousness, as well as their ability to perceive details that most often or not others would miss. It is during this conversation with Urahara that Shinji notices that his Lieutenant Aizen is spying on him. After uncovering him and making that comment about Aizen's mother's womb, his lieutenant tells Shinji that he is a scary person, but Shinji responds by saying that it is Aizen in fact who is the scary one, further confirming that he is keeping a close eye on Aizen, having his suspicions that he may be up to no good. We then get a slight time skip as 9 years pass since Urahara had become a captain. The events that occur after this time skip would prove to change Shinji's world forever. The Soul Society was made aware of some strange deaths that had been occurring within the Rukongai district, and it is at this time that the 9th Division was tasked to investigate what was going on. However, after some time had passed and concerns grew about the whereabouts of the 9th Division, Shinji along with a group of other Shinigami were tasked to investigate the disappearances within the Rukongai district, as well as finding out what had happened to Kensei and his squad. Upon arriving, they quickly discover a holified Kensei. Shinji had arrived just in time to defend Hiyori from the holified captain. The group of Shinigami are then attacked by Kensei's lieutenant Mashiro Kuna. After Hachi arrives on the battle scene, they are able to subdue both Kensei and Mashiro, but it is at this point that Hiyori begins choking as the unthinkable happens. Hiyori too begins to become holified and attacks Shinji, and in addition to this, a mysterious individual arrives and takes out the rest of the rescue squad. After this attack by this mysterious individual, it is revealed that Shinji was the only one who is still conscious. We quickly learn the identity of this attacker to be Kaname Tozen. Shinji is then caught off guard by the arrival of his lieutenant Aizen, as he is accompanied by Genichimaru, as we learn that the individual who had been holifying the Shinigami was indeed his own lieutenant. It is through this flashback arc that we learn about the relationship that Shinji has with Aizen, and the reason for the 100-year grudge that Shinji and the other vizards would have against Aizen. Shinji admits that he isn't surprised that Aizen would be behind this. As his captain, Shinji had quickly suspected that Aizen was somebody who could not be trusted, and that there was a lot more to Aizen than meets the eye. We learn that Shinji had purposefully selected Aizen to be his lieutenant in order for him to keep a close eye on him. However, Aizen reveals that he had taken advantage of Shinji's suspicions. Because of Shinji's suspicions, Aizen was able to manipulate him through his Kyoka Suigetsu. Shinji would have lowered his guard, assuming that his lieutenant would be following him. But what Shinji did not know was that for the past month a decoy had been following him. Because Shinji didn't have a meaningful relationship with his lieutenant, he wasn't able to spot the subtle differences between this decoy and the real Aizen. If Shinji was more trusting and had actually formed a friendship with his lieutenant, then Aizen feared that his decoy would have been seen through. But ironically, thanks to Shinji's suspicions, Aizen was able to go around his back and do these holification experiments. And it is for this reason that Aizen had willingly accepted Shinji's offer of becoming his lieutenant. After realizing his oversight, Aizen states that Shinji is responsible for his comrades having fallen unconscious and becoming holified. Understandably, after hearing this claim that he would be responsible for the holification of his friends, Shinji becomes immediately angered. However, because he too is gradually becoming holified, his heightened emotions within this situation lead to the holification process speeding up. Aizen is so smug during this exchange. He ends up thanking Shinji for being so easily provoked, and takes note that the process of holification is sped up when an individual is in an heightened emotional state. When Aizen orders Tozen to finish off the Shinigami, Shinji defends his comrades. During this exchange, Shinji did his best to remain calm, being aware that his feelings of anger would only speed up his holification. Just as Shinji began to have the upper hand against Tozen, the holification process proves to be too overwhelming and knocks Shinji unconscious. And just as Aizen was about to kill Shinji and the others, he ends up being saved by the arrival of Urahara and Tessai. And of course, we know the rest of the story. Urahara is held responsible for the holification of his comrades, while Aizen gets away with everything scot-free. The night before he was made to appear before the Central 46, Urahara had been trying his best to assist his comrades, trying to reverse the holification process. While he is being sentenced, Yoriichi had broken into Urahara's lab and had retrieved the bodies of Shinji and the others. Along with the holified Shinigami, she had also retrieved a prototype Gigai. With this, the holified Shinigami along with Tessai, Urahara and Yoriichi leave for the human world, where Urahara is able to help Shinji and the others by creating Ryatsu blocking Gigai, where they are able to undo some of the effects of the holification process. While the vizards were in the world of the living, Aizen and his accomplices began to be promoted within the Gotei 13, as not too long after, Aizen had become the captain of the 5th Division, taking Shinji's position position after having successfully fooled everybody. This then perfectly leads us into Shinji's first appearance within the story at the end of chapter 183. I've always thought of Shinji's character introduction to be one of the most visually iconic scenes within the entirety of the Bleach manga. The way that Kubo draws this mysterious character floating upside down above Ichigo and the others. We are introduced to a new character whose introduction also reminds me of the introduction of Uryu. We were aware that there was something unique about Uryu's character when we had noticed that he was able to see Ichigo in his Shinigami Shihakusho, while Kubo had employed more covert measures with Uryu's character. When it came to Shinji's character, Kubo overtly made us aware that this individual has spiritual powers, through how he is floating upside down in the air watching Ichigo in his Shinigami form. Although initially appearing to be a sinister threat, we learned that Shinji was only trying to grow closer to Ichigo in order to assist him with his struggles with his inner hollow. In order to accomplish this goal, he had even disguised himself as a student and had attended Ichigo's school. It doesn't take long before he formally introduces himself to Ichigo in chapter 184. While Ichigo is making his way over to battle against a hollow, he appears behind Ichigo and ends up attacking him, revealing that Shinji has his own Zanpakuto. After Ichigo demands to know who Shinji is in chapter 185, he reveals that he too has his own hollow mask, as Ichigo is made aware that Shinji holds a lot of similarity to himself, as he too is a Shinigami who has been crossed over with a hollow. He introduces himself as a vizard and states that he is just like Ichigo. He offers an invitation to him to join his group, as he states that he doesn't belong with the Shinigami, he belongs with the vizards. In chapter 187, after being alerted to an intense spiritual pressure belonging to Ichigo's father, the exchange between Shinji and Ichigo comes to an end. After the sudden appearance of this spiritual pressure, Shinji becomes aware at how terrible Ichigo is at sensing spiritual pressure. Before Ichigo leaves, he makes it clear that he doesn't care who Shinji is, because there is no way that he is joining him. He reaffirms to himself that he is a Shinigami and he isn't a vizard. He still hasn't come to terms with the hollow which lays dormant within himself. Rejecting his inner hollow, he refuses Shinji's invitation for assistance. In chapter 189, Ichigo drags Shinji out of the classroom, wondering what on earth he is still doing here, after Ichigo had refused his offer of help. He had made it clear that he didn't want to be recruited into Shinji's group, so for this reason, Shinji no longer has any reason to be here. But the leader of the vizard reveals to Ichigo that he isn't going to give up. Either way, Ichigo doesn't have a choice. After all, he is a vizard himself. Whether if he likes it or not, he is already on their side. If he doesn't manage to control the inner hollow within him, then it is only a matter of time before it starts to affect his friendships. Eventually, Ichigo will be swallowed by his inner hollow and go insane. Shinji is the first one to pinpoint the exact issue that Ichigo is going through. The fact that the hollow within Ichigo is growing too big for him to handle. He is the voice of reason and the solution to Ichigo's problems here. And for nothing in return, he is offering to teach Ichigo how to retain his sanity and to not lose it to his inner hollow. Sure enough, just as Shinji had predicted, Ichigo was left with no choice but to come to him. At the end of chapter 214, we see Ichigo arriving at the Vizard's lair after being defeated by Yami and being unable to protect Orihime, and then being defeated by Grimmjow and being unable to protect Rukia. Ichigo was forced to come to Shinji because his inner hollow continued to disrupt him during battle. Despite refusing its assistance, his inner hollow continued to grow. Before he becomes consumed by his inner hollow like Shinji had predicted, Ichigo arrives to be trained by Shinji and the Vizards. He makes it clear that he isn't here to join them, but he is here to unapologetically use them in order to control his inner hollow. In order to prove himself worthy of being trained, he ends up battling against Shinji. Hiyori then takes over as she challenges Ichigo, while Shinji watches the two of them battle. He witnesses Ichigo's inner hollow manifest and almost choke Hiyori to death. He, along with the other Vizards, end up restraining Ichigo. Shinji begins his training in chapter 217, as Hiyori makes him run on this exercise machine, as Shinji explains that this will help him to prepare for his upcoming training. The longer that he can keep on this exercise machine, then the more that he will get out of his training. When Ichigo continues to be ungrateful and complain about his training, stating that it is taking too long and he doesn't have time to play with the Vizards, Shinji loses his patience and tells him to shut up. It is here that we are made aware that this group called the Vizards are aware of Aizen and the Hokyoku, as Shinji reveals to Ichigo that he doesn't even know how long it takes for the Hokyoku to awaken, so on what grounds can he be speaking about wasting time? In chapter 217, Shinji states that he already knows about the Hokyoku, the Arankars, and even Aizen. He has known about them for years. He ends up giving in to Ichigo's request for a shortcut to his training, as we learn that Shinji knows that Ichigo was able to become a Shinigami and achieve Shikai and Bankai in a very short amount of time. Ichigo is surprised that he knows about this. Shinji places his hand over Ichigo's face as he falls unconscious, sending Ichigo into his inner world where he will learn how to holofy on command. beforehand. Shinji ended up initiating a process where Ichigo would become a hollow all of the way, but Ichigo's goal here is to not let his hollow consume him. Instead, he needs to consume the hollow. If his hollow takes over here, then it is over for him. Now, earlier on, when Ichigo had been struggling with his inner hollow, Rukia had suggested to him to get help from Urahara, but Ichigo made it clear that Urahara knows what he is going through, and if he could have helped him, then he would have done so. The fact that Shinji knows about how Ichigo had become a Shinigami, and that he had learnt Shikai and Bankai in a short amount of time, leads me to believe that Urahara had probably spoken to Shinji and had asked him to train Ichigo. This explains his impeccable timing, as he appears right at the start of the Arrancar arc, as soon as Ichigo begins to have issues with his inner hollow. This is speculation, but I believe that it is reasonable to come to this conclusion, especially considering that Urahara was the one who had dealt with the Hollow White during the Everything But the Rain flashback arc, when the Hollow had possessed Ichigo's mother. The Vizards take turns in subduing Ichigo's outer body, while he is in his inner world. Ichigo is finally able to gain control over his inner hollow in chapter 222, as Shinji asks him how he is feeling, to which Ichigo smiles and replies that he is not doing too bad. The focus of Ichigo's training with Shinji and the Vizards then shifts, as he is trained to lengthen the time that he can manifest his hollow mask, as Shinji is able to manifest his hollow mask for 5 minutes, while Ichigo struggles to manifest his for longer than 10 seconds. In chapter 230, Shinji is left with no choice but to let Ichigo go when he senses that Grimmjow has arrived in the world of the living. In chapter 236, we learn that Shinji had followed Ichigo, as he ends up saving both Rukia and Ichigo from a Saro attack from Grimmjow, and it is here where we truly get to see Shinji's power demonstrated for the very first time, as we see him easily hold his own against the 6th Espada. After quickly losing his patience with the hot-headed Grimmjow, he manifests his hollow mask and easily subdues the Espada. Just as Grimmjow is about to release his Zanbakuto, Ulquiorra arrives and takes him away, thus ending his battle with Shinji. At the start of chapter 239, we learn that Ichigo had left a note to say thanks to the Vizards, as Shinji becomes aware that Ichigo has gone to Hueco. After Shinji and the Vizards play their part in assisting Ichigo with his hollow powers, we don't really see them again until the fake Karakura town arc. At the end of chapter 364, when it appears that Aizen has the upper hand and the Gotei 13 have been defeated, the Vizards arrive, finally reuniting with Aizen after almost 100 years. After arriving, Shinji ends up speaking to head captain Yamamoto, as the captain commander wonders if Shinji has arrived to seek revenge. He clarifies their position by stating that they want revenge against Aizen, and that they don't really care about the Gotei 13. Head captain Yamamoto asks Shinji if they can consider the Vizards as their allies, but Shinji states that they are not allies, they are simply enemies of Aizen, and that they are Ichigo's allies. At the end of chapter 365, all of the Vizards activate their masks as they begin to battle. At the end of chapter 366, Shinji cuts to the chase and appears in front of Aizen. As he declares that he is going to end this, he strikes towards Aizen, but his attack is blocked by Tozen. Tozen is able to inflict a cut above Shinji's left eye, as blood begins to run down his face. Before he can strike the Vizard again, Komamura arrives to assist Shinji. In chapter 375, we catch up with Shinji as we see that he is facing off against Gin. Their brief encounter comes to an end after Aizen calls for Gin and Tozen to come back, after he takes out Haribel. In chapter 377, Shinji warns the other Vizards not to approach Aizen carelessly, but after Aizen taunts the Vizards, Hiyori loses her cool and charges towards him, but this is where she is taken out by Gin. Shinji is powerless to help Hiyori, as he wonders where on earth Ichigo is, as he remembers that Orihime could heal Hiyori's injuries. In chapter 383, a fascinating exchange occurs between Shinji and Aizen, as Aizen explains to the Vizard how he is planning to become a god. Aizen deems Shinji worthy enough to use his Zanbakuto against him. Shinji leaves Hiyori in the care of Hachi, as he tells him to look after her until Ichigo arrives. Aizen begins to question the trust that Shinji has in Ichigo, but he doesn't expect Aizen to understand, since he has no trust in his own underlings. This is demonstrated through how he easily had taken out Haribel earlier. Aizen tells Shinji that when you trust someone, it means that you are relying on them, and this is ultimately a sign of weakness. So it is for this reason that trusting others isn't something that Aizen or his underlings do. Shinji questions how can Aizen believe this, since he has so many subordinates. Surely Aizen would have only gained such a following if he had told them to trust in him, but Aizen reveals that he had never asked his subordinates to trust in him. He had only asked them to accompany him. He hadn't extended this offer beyond these simple words. He never asked for their trust. In fact, he had reminded the Espada and the Arrancars to not trust anybody, including him. However, it appears that very few had heeded Aizen's warning, explaining the sense of betrayal that Haribel must have felt after Aizen had cut her down, despite warning her not to even trust in him. Aizen explains that all beings trust their superiors superiors. They are unable to survive on their own if they don't blindly follow a leader. It is through this basic concept of having trust in a higher power that Aizen begins to elaborate upon his true motive, revealing that people want to find a god to believe in. He tells Shinji that he will show him before his very eyes how he will become a god, one that is superior to the Soul King. He wants to become a divine being that others can put their faith in, and as a result, others will begin to put their trust in him. It's fascinating that the idea of trust is brought up between these two characters. In the past, Shinji had been Aizen's superior, but despite them sharing these positions of captain and lieutenant, neither of them had trust in each other. Aizen, of course, didn't trust Shinji, as he had no real reason to place his faith in him, not deeming him worthy enough to obey and to forsake his desires of becoming a false god. The dysfunctional past of these two characters is once again brought up in chapter 385, as we begin to understand the advantages that the two characters have after deciding not to trust each other. When I'd spoken about the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, I spoke about how Aizen had taken advantage, or the fact that Shinji didn't trust him, and how he had kept a close eye on him, never really opening up to him. Neither of them had really tried to get to know each other. So it is for this reason that Shinji didn't know anything about Aizen's Zanpakuto. But this also works the other way, as Aizen has no idea what kind of power Shinji's Zanpakuto has. Shinji then questions if Aizen really believes that Kyokasu is the only Zanpakuto that can manipulate an individual's senses. Shinji then releases the Shikai of his Zanpakuto Sakanade. His Zanpakuto begins rapidly spinning clockwise. Aizen comments on the interesting shape of his Zanpakuto, but states that he doesn't feel any change, as he recalls that Shinji had stated that his Zanpakuto would take over his senses. It is at this moment that Shinji confirms that change has already taken effect. We learn that Shinji's Zanpakuto has the ability to invert an individual's senses, as he welcomes Aizen to his upside down world. Not only are the directions of up and down reversed, Shinji also reverses right and left. This is the ability of his Shikai. Fascinatingly, in chapter 387, Shinji is the one and only Shinigami who is able to actually land an attack on Aizen. When Shinji charges towards Aizen, he is able to deduce that the leader of the Vizards can also invert the directions of front and back. It appears that Aizen has successfully blocked Shinji, but despite this, Aizen still gets cut on his right arm, as his former captain reveals that he is also able to invert the direction of Aizen's sight, and where his wounds are inflicted are also reversed. Shinji is confident that it is impossible for anybody to make all of these adjustments within their head. Just as Shinji gains some confidence in the battle, Aizen realizes that his Shikai is no more than an optical illusion, as he easily sees through it, referring to it as child's play, and it cannot be compared to his own Zanpakuto, which can take control of all 5 senses. After this, Ichigo ends up successfully arriving in fake Karakura town, and Shinji and the other Vizards don't really do anything of significance for the rest of this arc, aside from assisting Hitsugaya in mistakenly attacking Momo. Now, I just went over the exchange between Shinji and Aizen from one perspective. If you want to see another perspective, then I highly recommend checking out my Aizen character analysis, where we get to understand more about his mindset and philosophy. So definitely go and check out that video if you want to know more about the nuance and detail behind this exchange. In chapter 392, Aizen is successful in taking out Shinji along with the other members of the Gotei 13. He doesn't kill them so that they can witness what is yet to come. We don't see Shinji again until after Aizen is defeated by Ichigo, as we catch up with him in chapter 422, where he thanks Unohana for healing Hiyori. Unohana questions why he is thanking her, as it isn't necessary. After all, she was saving the life of one of her comrades. You can see that the Gotei 13 no longer have anything against the Vizards. Presumably it is because of their non-judgmental nature that some of the Vizards joined the Gotei 13 once again. We don't really get to see this happen within the manga, but during the Fullbring arc, in chapter 479, we see that Shinji has reclaimed his position as the captain of the 5th division. He doesn't have much more of an involvement within the Fullbring arc, aside from being one of the Shinigami who had placed their Reishi into the Reishi sword that was used to restore Ichigo's powers. This now takes us to Shinji's appearance within the final arc of the story, the 1000-Year Blood War arc. He doesn't have much of a role during the first invasion of the Quincy, aside from reacting to the deaths of head captain Yamamoto and to the arrival of Ichigo into the Soul Society. And after the first invasion, he isn't really that badly injured. In chapter 515, he updates Ichigo on Rukia and Renji's condition, explaining how the two of them have just gotten out of surgery and are being kept at the intensive care ward. When Rukia thanks Ichigo for coming to save the Soul Society, Ichigo states that he doesn't deserve her thanks, since he didn't do anything. It is here that Shinji scolds Ichigo, reminding him that his actions had driven Yuha back out of the Soul Society. If Ichigo didn't arrive when he did, then the Soul Society would be in a lot more of a mess. He reminds Ichigo to stick his chest out more, and to feel feel confident in his actions. After Ichigo leaves, Shinji ends up speaking to Rukia. He comments on how Ichigo is always busy no matter the situation. He always ignores his wounds in order to take care of others. Rukia questions Shinji, asking him why was it that Ichigo looked like he was in pain. Shinji reveals to her that Ichigo had gone through a rough time as well. His Zanpakuto had been broken, and in all honesty, Ichigo was right. He wasn't able to save anybody, revealing that Shinji was aware of how useless Ichigo was, but he didn't want to rub salt into his wounds, hence why he had tried to encourage him earlier on. And in a similar manner, he tries to reassure Rukia, as he tells her that Ichigo is probably tired and she shouldn't have to worry about him. In chapter 517, we see Shinji meeting with the royal guards when they arrive to take Ichigo and the others to the Soul King's palace. When the Quincy once again attack the Soul Society, he ends up having a brief encounter with Bambietta, but he is taken out by her in chapter 556 and has to be saved by Komamura. Shinji is one of the first people to learn from Uruhara that he is intending to break into the Soul King's palace in chapter 612. Shinji accompanies Ichigo and the others as they break into the Soul King's palace, which has been transformed by the Quincy into their own fortress called Waterworld. Shinji does encounter the stern-ritter Lil Barrow, but he leaves Shunsui behind to deal with him, stating that it is the job of the captain commander in order to give up his life for his underlings. Of course, he would have stayed back to help Shunsui if time wasn't of the essence. When he arrives at the upper levels of the city, they are confronted by the stern-ritter Gerard Valkyrie. In chapter 654, it appears that Gerard ends up taking out Shinji and his lieutenant Momo through using his shrift, the Miracle. Because of the rushed nature of the end of the 1000-year Blood War arc, we don't really get to know about their whereabouts until after the 10-year time skip, where we learn that Shinji and Momo had indeed survived, as we see them present at the captain ceremony of Rukia in chapter 685. So this is the extent of Shinji's involvement within the story. Now I know that some people, including myself, complained that the role of the Vizards dwindled after the defeat of Aizen, and the fact that they had joined the Gotei 13 had made their characters fade into obscurity, because factually speaking, we didn't see them do anything after the Fate Karakura Town arc, and to be honest, it may have been a wiser choice for Kubo to keep Shinji and the others as Vizards. This would enable them to remain as a unique and distinctive group separate from the Gotei 13. Even if we didn't get this, I would have loved if we got to see the Vizard members being accepted back into the Soul Society, but we didn't get to see any of this. If you want my opinion, from the actual manga that we got from chapters 1 to 686, I do believe that Shinji Hirako was a character with wasted potential, especially since we didn't get to see his Bankai and the true extent of his abilities. I know that his Shikai was used within the 1000-year Blood War arc, but he was still severely underutilized within this final arc. We didn't see him take part in any proper battles within the Fullbring arc, and shockingly, he didn't do anything of significance during the 1000-year Blood War arc. This truly baffles me, because Shinji is one of the most powerful Shinigami within the story. I do hope that some additional scenes involving his character are added within the anime adaptation of the 1000-year Blood War arc. Even if we don't get this, I would love to have a Bankai reveal within the upcoming Hell arc that was announced in August of 2021. Whatever the case, I wouldn't call this the end of Shinji's story, and I look forward to seeing more of his character in the future. So we're at the part of the video where I hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you think of Shinji Hirako? Did you learn anything new about him from this video? Or do you think that I missed some points about his character? I would love to know all of your thoughts, so definitely leave a comment under this video, letting me know what you think of the leader of the Vizards and the captain of the 5th Division. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach character analysis. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, then please consider supporting my channel on Patreon. I have multiple tiers with rewards including access to an exclusive Discord server, video scripts, as well as being the first to know about unreleased upcoming videos. Thank you for your time, and whatever you choose to contribute I will appreciate, and it will mean a lot to me.